Welcome back to the brand new second episode of Magic Mike Shows You the Money. I am the aforementioned Magic Mike, not so magic, definitely Mike. The first episode came out in June of 2022 in a summer transfer window where Arsenal were splashing the cash around and no one seemed to understand how. We took a deep dive into our wages and the tough decisions that had to be made to try to put some context around it. 6 months later, and about a third of the way into the new season, the latest Arsenal finances have come out. The annual report for the year ending May 31st, 2022 has been released. So it's time for another deep dive into what's actually in the numbers, how we're doing, and of course the billion-pound question, what does it mean for our present and our future on the pitch? There's a lot of interesting information in there, and it marks the first financials that are truly post-COVID shutdown, post-empty stadiums, and in a season where Arsenal had no European competition or prize money for the first time since the 1995-96 season. The season following a 12th place finish, 6 points from the relegation zone, with George Graham getting sacked for accepting bungs, which isn't really as hot as it kind of sounds. So, long time since that's happened. How did Arsenal fare financially in the year ending May of 2022? And more importantly, to 99% of people watching this who don't exactly sweat over how much Josh and Stan Kroenke have in their wallet, what do our financial results mean when it comes to our transfer policy, the future of the club spending, our ability to maintain and re-sign so many of our young superstars, and reinforce our playing staff so that, I don't know, a knee injury to our new striker won't send the fan base into a hysterical panic? Let's dive in. First of all, it's important to set the scene of what is and is not included in this year's financials and how this year differed from the year before, when Arsenal posted a pre-tax loss of £127 million, its largest loss ever. Going back a season, the May 2021 results showed the financials for a season where we competed in the Europa League, knocked out in the semifinal by Unai Emery's Villarreal, a very bad evening indeed. This season was also unique because the vast majority of the season there were no fans in the seats, which obviously had a huge impact on all Premier League teams' finances, but especially those like Arsenal who are at or near the top of the league when it comes to how significant the impact of game day revenues is on the overall picture. One unique thing to remember financially about the 2021 results is that the Premier League prize money and the money for showing games was actually a lot higher than it normally would be. The reason is because of the delayed end of the 2020 season due to COVID, where the last 10 Premier League games were moved to the summer and into the 2021 financial year, as well as the final 3 rounds of the FA Cup, a cup that Arsenal, of course, won. So our record £127 million losses happened even with the higher TV money of basically having 48 Premier League games in a season instead of 38. About 77 million of the 127 million pre-tax loss was directly as a result of losing those game day revenues for all but a couple of games at the Emirates. Another 32 million pounds was as a result of a one-time charge to refinance external debt into internal debt that cost money last year but will reap rewards for the club for years to come. The rest, a compound effect of continually playing in the Europa League instead of the Champions League, and a not yet financially realized impact of clearing out a tremendous amount of deadwood. Remember, the financial pain you feel when you basically pay someone to leave on a free or cancel their contract stings at the time, and it doesn't look good. But it can take 1 or 2 years at least for the true benefits financially of those actions to be realized. We very much were, as Josh Kroenke told a couple of poorly dressed Yank podcasters in Denver in 2019, a Europa League team and eventually a team completely out of Europe on Champions League wages. This year's financials cover a season where Arsenal finished 5th in the league, barely missing out on returning to the Champions League about a year ahead of what the club's internal expectations would have been. But frustrating nonetheless, the way it happened in the final weeks of the campaign. It covers a season where the fans returned to the Emirates and with a new and energized vigor and a support for a team that wasn't yet the finished product, but looked drastically different in age, in energy, in wages, and in mentality than most of the teams of the seasons before. As I said before, it covered a year where we had no European football whatsoever, and therefore no European football money. As for transfers, it covers the time period starting in the summer of 2021, when we spent about 140 plus million pounds to bring in Benjamin White, Martin Odegaard, Aaron Ramsdale, Takahiro Tomiyasu, Sambi Lakanga, Nuno Tavares, and Austin Trusty, and sold a grand total of one player for money, Joe Willett, for 25 million pounds. This despite having just suffered a 127 million pound pre-tax loss in the season before. It also includes a year where we spent nothing during the January transfer window, a move which frustrated many, but showed an incredible amount of discipline in sticking to a plan of not buying players for the short term or buying them for the sake of buying them or in bad value deals, such as the one that would have taken place had we triggered the release clause for Alexander Isak. So look at that how you would, whether you feel it cost us the top four or not. I don't know that it's possible to say that one way or the other, but it certainly was discipline, perhaps to our own disadvantage. Let's dig into the overall numbers. In the May 2021 financials, we suffered that pre-tax loss of 127 million pounds. The loss number for the May 22 financials is a significant but much improved 45.5 million pounds. So how do we manage to lose 45 million pounds? And how can I do that myself? That's the important question. There's a few different types of income and expenses for Arsenal Football Club. First, football income, also known as turnover. When I think of turnover, it's usually preceded by the words apple cinnamon, but in this case, it's another way of talking about money coming into the club from actual football operations on a week-to-week basis. There's three main components to turnover. One, match day revenues, ticket sales, corporate hospitality, concessions, things like that. And if you ever want to get a sense of what match day revenues are going to look like in any given year, what you need to do is find out how many home games I attended in that year. Because when I go, match day revenues on beer and hot dog and pies just go through the roof. So if Arsenal during the COVID year had just been allowed to have one fan in attendance and it was me, we'd only have lost 60 million pounds, not 127 million pounds. The second area of turnover is television and prize money, which comes from the Premier League, the domestic and international TV contracts, as well as the European competitions, prize money, and their TV contracts. The higher you finish in the Premier League, the more money you generally win in TV money, which is also broken up into four parts. Television money in the Premier League is broken first into what's called the equal share. This is 50% of the total TV contract money overall, split equally amongst all 20 Premier League teams. So every club gets about 2.5% of the entire TV contract, which is over £3 billion in 2022. Last season, every Premier League club, from Manchester City all the way down to Norwich, earned £79 million just for being in the Premier League. The second part of the prize money is central commercial fees. This is a pool of about 112 million pounds last year that comes from commercial revenues on Premier League broadcasts that split equally amongst all 20 teams. So it's about 5.6 million per team. So that's about 85 million for just being in the Premier League before you ever kick a ball. Wonder why that game at Wembley in the end of May for the championship playoff finals is so highly important to teams. Third, you have facility fees. These are the fees paid based on how many times your team is actually televised. As we know, unlike in places like the United States, not all Premier League games are televised. But the ones that are moved and the ones that are considered and deemed most important and have the most marketable matchups, those are televised more. This pool is about 700 million pounds, and the teams who have more televised games earn more. So don't worry, away fans, whose enjoyable Saturday day trip back and forth to Manchester becomes a Monday evening trip where it's impossible to get a train back and you're out there missing work and supporting your club and sprinting to the train station or missing work the next day or paying for a hotel, don't worry. The club makes a little bit more money than they would for a Saturday 3 p.m. games. Teams generally earn anywhere from £11 million to £27 million from this income stream, depending on how many games were televised. And finally, the merit payment. This is a pure payment that comes from and is determined by where you finish in the Premier League. This is the sliding scale of prize money for finishing higher in the table. Each spot earns you about $2.7 million of additional prize money compared to the team finishing right below you. So spread over 20 teams, the range of merit payouts range from about £3 million for the 20th team to over £51 million for the champions of the Premier League. So the worst teams in the league and the ones that finish bottom are still earning over £100 million, and the top teams are earning over £155 million. This is a very important component to overall turnover. The third source of revenue for a football club, commercial revenues, includes things like sponsorship and the like. So once again, we have commercial revenues, we have television money, and game day revenues. So how did we fare in these categories? Game day revenues hit their peak in 2014 to 2016, and we had regular appearances in the Champions League, getting into the elimination stage every single year. Not very far in, let's be honest, but until we got knocked out by Barcelona or Bayern Munich, we got those revenues with Champions League pricing, FA Cup runs with home matches, game day revenues right around £100 million. In 2021, the COVID year, those revenues dropped to under £4 million due to having empty stadiums for almost the entire season. And in 2022, they snapped back to just under £80 million. Lower than we're capable, lower than we saw 7-8 years ago, but that's because we had no European games at all, rather than the 6, 7, 8, 9 home European games that we would have had in prior years. Television revenues, about £146 million in 2021, which includes a £42 million merit payment for finishing fifth in the league. Our high mark of TV revenues was the 2016-2017 season, where a new contract had just been signed. We made it into the knockout stages of the Champions League and brought in a cool $200 million of TV revenues. Commercial income. This number has grown steadily, although it lags pretty far behind some other teams at the top of the Premier League table. We can debate how they get the commercial income or not, but let's just leave that there. And commercial income now sits at £142 million. Part of the growth that we've had here against the last year or two certainly came from the Amazon documentary, which more than offset any losses in commercial income that we would have had due to reduced commercial revenues tied to contracts when you fall completely out of Europe. So you put in the £79 million game day, you toss in about $146 million in TV money, $142 million in commercial income, add in $2 million or so in miscellaneous football related income, sprinkle in some Parmesan cheese and a white wine reduction sauce, and boom, you've got your turnover number, £369 million. Probably good for about fifth or sixth in the Premier League once everybody's 2022 financials come out, but with huge gaps in the turnover numbers from your Manchester Cities and your Manchester Uniteds of the world. And yes, probably a small gap between us and that lot up north, who will have higher turnover numbers from their new stadium, but of course at the cost of over £1 billion of debt. But that's a video I'll do on another day. Last year, our turnover was £328 million, so the £41 million increase from last year to this year is a combination of the huge restoration of game day revenues, slightly increased commercial revenues, and then partially offset by a significant drop in broadcast revenue from not being in Europe and not having that chunk of the 2020 season moved into the 2021 season. Footballing expenses. Now, the expenses that go against turnover are important to analyze, and we're going to first talk about the ones that are strictly related on a week-to-week basis to running a football club. So Arsenal incur a couple different types of expenses that go against the turnover. there are two primary expenses involved here. First, the stupidly named catch-all called other expenses, which are expenses that include just about everything other than paying employees, players, coaches, player trading profits and losses, interest on debt, everything else. A large part of this is related to the expenses of putting on games at Emirates Stadium. And as a result, this number went from $79 million in 2020 down to $47 million in 2021 when we played behind closed doors, back up to the more typical £76 million in 2022. Second, staff costs. This includes a combination of a few things: pension and social security costs for all employees, annual compensation for all the club's coaching, commercial, administrative, and ground staff, which went down considerably in the COVID year of 2021. We don't know exact numbers of employees for 2022 until the full financial reports come out in the coming days or weeks, but I think we can assume it's slightly higher than 2021, but lower than 2020. And of course, the big chunk, the players' wages. This is where the true story is told about Mikel Arteta and Edu's process, and we will expand on this significantly later in this review in part 2. The overall wage bill for the club dropped from £244 million in 2021 to £212 million in 2022. Let's just say for now that a drop of £32 million on the wage bill, about 13%, is very much not the trend in the rest of the major Premier League teams. And given the changes in the last few years, this is absolutely the story of a process being well run as it stands now. Total of the direct football expenses in the 22 financials is £288 million, which gives us a footballing profit of just under £81 million, more than double the footballing profits of £39 million the year before, and back in the range of our more typical footballing profits in the Europa League era for Arsenal, even though in that year we were not in the Europa League, or any Europe for that matter. Definitely still lower than our Champions League footballing profits, which were well over £100 million. But we might just be headed back for those days, so let's keep our fingers crossed. Now, the non-footballing revenues and expenses, these are categories that aren't about the day-to-day or the week-to-week, but the overall. It doesn't mean they have nothing to do with football. It's just more about the overall running and maintenance of the club and the playing squad rather than the weekly ins and outs. We have a few categories here. First, the expenses. Exceptional costs. These are usually one-time or non-recurring expenses for things like paying coaches that don't work for the club anymore, paying a fee to refinance debt away from being external debt owed to others and towards being favorable, more favorable internal debt owed to KSE on much better and more flexible terms. For the first time since 2017, Arsenal had zero exceptional costs this season, since we're no longer helping Arsene Wenger and Unai Emery and their staffs to nick a living while no longer being with Arsenal. In 2021, we not only had leftover money to pay Unai Emery, but we also booked a £32 million expense for refinancing the stadium bonds to internal debt, a $32 million one-time expense that will be saving us 2, 3, or maybe even 4 times that over the next 5 to 10 years, and gave us a lot more free cash flow in security that we had to keep aside for the external debt, but do not have to keep aside now for the internal debt to accomplish the things that we wanted to accomplish. The second expense in this category is amortization and impairment of player registrations. Think of this, generally speaking, as being an annual prorated total of the transfer fees we've paid on players that we've brought in and the cost of getting rid of some of the deadwood. I've harped on and on and on before on our podcast about how spending £50 million on a player isn't all accounted for in 1 year. It's spread over the duration of their initial contract. So if their contract is 5 years long and you've paid a fee for them of £50 million, it adds £10 million a year to the accounting. Doesn't matter whether you pay in installments or not. That's not the point. It's how it's booked as revenue or expenses in any given year. This is why wages paid are as important or more important than transfer fees, and the reason why I go absolutely crazy when people start talking about transfer kitties, because that concept is so misguided that my cranium explodes when people report on what our transfer kitty is and how much KSE is giving us for transfers or not giving us for transfers. It's just pure fiction. The 2022 numbers report this number as being 127 million pounds in the year just finished, up from 117 million the year before, which is phenomenal when you consider the investment we made during the year on bringing in 7 new players. Remember, spending 146 million on players in the summer before last season generally only adds about 30 to 35 million to the annual amortization costs, given the fact that most of these players are on 4 to 5 year contracts. And meanwhile, last year we were finally 5 years out and no longer accounting for transfer fee amortization from that huge lucrative summer spend of the 2016-2017 season, where we bought Granit Xhaka, Skodran Mustafi, Lucas Perez, Rob Holding, and future World Cup superstar Takuma Asano. As I discussed in the Pulitzer Prize-winning first installment of Magic Mike Shows You the Money, this is a major part of why we've been able to spend as much as we have in the last 2 summer transfer windows without having an earth-shattering change in our overall amortization expense. Interest charges. This is the cost of borrowing money. Because that big 32 million pound one-time expense for refinancing our debt last year was included elsewhere in exceptional items, we don't see it here. Other expenses in this group came to 20.3 million pounds, slightly up from 17.5 the year before. Now, for the profit elements of the non-week-to-week football revenues, one major category that can ultimately swing a Premier League club's loss to a gain, and happens with many, many clubs under normal circumstances, is profits on sales and loans of players. Because unlike purchases of players, the revenues that you receive for these are accounted for all of the year they're received. Again, whether those are received in installments over 2, 3, 4, 5 years, or whether they're all received in 1 year, they are booked as revenue in the current year's report. For a top club under normal circumstances, you would have a much higher number than what Arsenal have had in recent years. I don't think that should surprise everybody, given how we've managed to not sell players very well. But we already knew this, because we've been digging out of a hole where it's been almost impossible, and much of it self-inflicted, to intelligently sell most of our players for the maximum value. In 2022, this number was 24 million pounds, virtually all of that coming from selling Joe Willock to Newcastle. Still higher than the year before, where we made essentially one sale, made 15 million pounds from the sale of Emi Martinez. Now, what we should have done with that transfer is think to add a clause that said every time he mentioned Arsenal after he left, we'd earn another £1 million, because that could have been the most lucrative transfer ever. But let's let bygones be bygones. 24 million pounds is way, way below previous year's total and what other rivals are typically booking. And then profits. We know that Arsenal Football Club used to hold a lot of different properties, the Highbury Stadium Square, Ashburton Grove, a lot of areas around where the stadium was developed, in case that it would have been developed someplace else in many cases. And occasionally they will sell off a property, as they did in the 2022 financial year, which netted the club £2 million. Woohoo! So you take your 81 million in footballing gain, you add your 2 million property profits, you toss on top the 24 million of player sales and loan fees, and you got 107 million pounds. Then you take away your 5 million in interest, your 20 million in other expenses, and suck out the 127 million in player amortizations of transfer fees. You carry the one, and you get an overall pre-tax loss of 45 million quid, as they like to say. Easy, right? Okay, a couple of quick things. First, if you like this video, Please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the Gooners Podcast and check out our catalog of shows with truly amazing guests and conversations over the last 7 years. And by the way, now would be a great time to learn about the award-winning charity called Gooners vs. Cancer, which raises money for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society in the Gooner community since 2017. Right now, we have some amazing Arsenal prizes available in our Gooner raffle, and you can win them and help to kick cancer by going to goonersvcancer.com and learn more about it. I'd like to show you a few quick words from some folks you might just be familiar with.
Hey Gooners, this is Alan Smith.
This is Kevin Campbell.
Lee Dixon.
Colin Lewin.
This is Gary Lewin.
Charles Watts.
Dan Potts.
James Benge.
Danny.
Tom from the Gooner Talk here.
Ryan Oakcastle.
Simon Collins. You may know me from the Evening Standard.
You may know me for my time at Arsenal.
You may know me from Arsenal or even the Hybrid Squad.
I'm about Cat Wonderland.
Being that physio, sat on the bench next to Arsene with my rubber gloves on.
The former Arsenal physio.
The Emirates Press Box, from writing, from Twitter.
From goal.com, from Twitter, from YouTube.
Football is the beautiful game and it brings us all together.
Sometimes there are things even more important than wins and losses.
And yes, even transfers.
Every 30 seconds, someone in this world gets diagnosed with blood cancer.
The Leukemia and Lymphoma Society works towards curing blood cancers
And provides support to families currently dealing with these diseases.
Gooners vs. Cancer was started in 2017
by a lifelong Gooner who lost his father to leukemia way too young.
Since 2017, Gooners v Cancer has raised
Over $75,000 for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society.
and we need your help to keep the fundraising going in this year's campaign.
Every donation helps.
Every donation helps.
Every donation helps.
Every donation helps.
No matter the size.
And every donation enters you into the Gooner raffle,
where you have a great chance to win amazing Arsenal prizes,
including game tickets, stadium tours, signed men and women's shirts.
And maybe a retro signed shirt by yours truly, Lee Dixon.
Me, yours truly.
Yours truly, Super Kev Campbell.
So much more.
It's easy to take part.
Just go to www.goonersvcancer.com
and donate directly to the charity.
Pick the raffle prizes you want to enter to win,
and wait for the drawings at the end of the campaign.
Again, that's www.goonersvscancer.com.
We all know that victory grows out of harmony.
Victory grows out of harmony.
Victory grows out of harmony.
With your help, we'll be victorious against blood cancer once and for all.
Thank you for your support.
Thank you for your support.
Thank you for your support.
Thanks for your support.
Thanks for your support.
And yes, thank you very much for those of you who have already supported. And please do check out goonersvcancer.com for some great prizes that you can win. And of course, it's an incredible cause that touches almost all of us. So there you go. Part 1 of Magic Mike Shows You the Money, Episode 2, our financial statements explained. So thanks for watching, and be sure to turn into Part 2 as we dig into what these numbers mean, projections for next year's financials, and how all of this impacts our Young Guns contract extensions and the upcoming January and summer transfer windows. That's all for now. Magic Mike out.